President Trump introduced an immigration bill that would award legal residency or green cards to foreign nationals who are considered highly skilled and would not pose a burden on the government or take jobs away from American workers. Overall, the bill would cut back legal immigration by aiming to bring in only those who are, get this, educated, speak English, and have high-paying job offers in the United States when granting visas. Trump said the current policy is hurting American workers.
This policy has placed substantial pressure on American workers, taxpayers, and community resources. Among those hit the hardest in recent years have been immigrants and, very importantly, minority workers competing for jobs against brand new arrivals.
Our president doesn't necessarily seem like the best reader. In particular, the White House blames the large number of low-skilled foreign workers entering this country for the high rate of joblessness among African-American males. Now listen to this exchange between Trump's senior policy advisor Stephen Miller and April Ryan, the White House correspondent for American Urban Radio.
For African-American workers, their labor force participation rate who don't have a high school diploma, I guess African-American males without a high school diploma, has plummeted some 40 percentage points since the mass wave of unskilled migration began. The reality is that if you just use common sense, and yes, I will use common sense, the reason why some companies want to bring in more unskilled labor is because they know that it drives down wages and reduces labor costs. Our question as a government is, to whom is our duty? Our duty is to U.S. citizens and U.S. workers to promote rising wages for them. If low-skilled immigration was an unalloyed good for the economy, then why have we been growing at 1.5% for the last 17 years at a time of unprecedented new low-wage arrivals? It's just the facts speak for themselves. At some point, we're accountable to reality. On the other hand, like I said, you have ultra-high-skilled workers who are at the back of the line, which makes no sense in the year 2017. Neil, let me go to you.
Now targeting African-American males. You just brought up the African-American male stats. Are you now targeting the black unemployment rate that is traditionally and historically higher than the average American? Is that what you're looking at?
There's no doubt, and I'll go to Neil, but there's no doubt, and it's very, very sad and very unfair, that immigration policy, both legal and illegal, over the last several decades, has a deleterious impact on African-American employment in general, and certainly African-American males, and it's been quite tragic, and we as a country have to have a conversation about that.
Yep, you heard him correctly. Joining us on our panel to break all of that down today is Robert Pattillo of CBS Radio in Atlanta, Kim Klacik, a Republican contributor at Politichicks.com, and Dr. Cleo Monago, behavioral health and cultural analyst. Guys, you heard the sound. You saw Stephen Miller. We remember Stephen Miller's exchange with Cuban-American Jim Acosta of CNN yesterday. Is President Trump, I'm starting with you, Robert, is President Trump really just rallying the troops and going all in on the absurd, almost white nationalism of his policy?
Well, I think with this policy, what President Trump is doing, trying to modernize the immigration system as it exists. Physicist Michio Kaku said that immigration is the only thing keeping America as a first world country. We do not produce domestically enough highly educated, highly skilled engineers, mathematicians, so on and so forth. We have to push those people to the front of the line. Right now, what this policy would do was allow us to import more people, get them to the front of the line to really innovate here. We're in competition with China, with Europe, with other countries that are developing, and if we fail to make sure we bring in highly skilled workers, we will fall behind.
Cleo, we hear this idea of changing our immigration policy in groups so that way folks who need to be here that can better help America, as Robert alluded to, can be here. But the immigration policy, as President Trump tries to put forward, also suggests that they're going to try to have an intense look at those who aren't already sending a great number of immigrants to the United States. Who might he be talking about, and wouldn't that work against our interest?
Well, at the risk of being very redundant, that's a very logical question. But this has nothing to do with logic. And what Trump is doing is making America great again. And he's making sure that he fulfills his promise to stop the infusion of immigrants that he doesn't like so people can get jobs. And I think it's very interesting that they're focusing now on making sure black men have jobs. I think that's just some more rhetoric and some more manipulation while they do what they really plan to do.
Kim, what do you think that your party is doing? Because Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Tom Cotton, and Senator David of Arkansas and Senator David Perdue of Georgia initially put forth the RAISE Act in February. So this isn't necessarily new policy.
Yeah, I think if implemented well, this is a good thing. You have to remember, there are a lot of low-skilled workers coming in and taking jobs from our fellow Americans. And you have to also remember, 1 out of 15 immigrants that come into our country are able to support themselves financially. Everyone else, unfortunately, is living on our system and our tax dollars. So I do think, and if you remember back in Baltimore City, I know you're from Baltimore, when migration really came into play, the Germans and the Irish immigrants came into the city, they did take a lot of the jobs from Black Americans, and that's what you see really right now in Baltimore City with the poverty situation, and it did push a lot of people to the side, especially in the Black community.
Robert, I'm going to go to you. A quick note, Kim, that does seem historically inconsistent and inaccurate given the way segregation is played out around job discrimination.
I think that's your personal opinion.
History and personal opinions aside, Robert,
when the Germans migrated to Baltimore City, it did take a lot of jobs from African Americans. It absolutely did.
We can reasonably deduce, given the historical context of the time, that those jobs wouldn't have been given to Black Americans nonetheless. Robert, I want to come back to you. This bill doesn't look like it, on its face, that it can actually move anywhere. Is there any value in even put forward legislation that won't move?
Well, truthfully, within the Republican Party, what we've seen is a fight between the moderate wings of the party and then the more conservative wings. Our senator from Atlanta, David Perdue, is on the more conservative wing of the party. I think they're putting forward their wish list bill. And then when it gets to the Senate, when it gets to the House, when it goes through committee, it'll come back to the center from where it is right now. I think the parts that will come in are the parts about giving extra points to people who are highly skilled, who speak English, who have job offers, because this is the system that most of the rest of the world has.
Robert, let me push back there. Isn't that what we already do with regard to our immigration policy in expediting those who can be of utility to the United States in that way?
Well, unfortunately, not to a great enough extent. Anybody who's practiced immigration law will say that the process of applying for a visa is a nightmare, that trying to immigrate into the country, there's a backlog that sometimes can last months or even years. So individuals who are highly skilled, instead of coming to the U.S., they go to China, they go to Australia, they go to the EU instead of contributing to the economy here. This is the system that's in place in Canada, Australia, and large parts of Europe. So what we have to do is find a center point on this that works. It stops the discrimination at the lower ends of the economy, but at the same time supports the ability for high-skilled workers to come into the system.
And you believe that Trump's system is going to do just that?
Well, Trump is not the king. He's not an oligarch. He's not a magical being.
Tell him that.
Well, what he is able to do, however, is if they push this most conservative version of the bill at the beginning, it will come back to the center, and hopefully we need comprehensive immigration reform in America. We've needed that for 30 years.
Robert, I want to jump in. You said if they push it, it will come back to the center. This idea of coming back to the center is something that some of those to the left of the center have always said about how the far right policy goes. Not under the Trump administration. That historically, in the 6-7 months that we've had President Trump, hasn't been accurate.
Well, what we've seen is that when bills don't come back to the center, they die. The same with the health care bill started, well, you already start with the Affordable Care Act, which is a right of center bill. Yes. And then the House bill was even further right of center. Then the Senate bill was even further right of center, which led to the bill dying. If it had actually come back to a point where they could attract some conservative Democrats, people like Claire McCaskill, or...
As a political observer, is there any reasonable reason, forgive the redundant question,
reasonable reason
is there any reason to believe that President Trump and the Senate Republicans, as we have them, will move to the center, given they haven't had a president of doing so?
Well, I think what we've seen is that President Trump is realizing he cannot work with the far right wing of the party. He couldn't work with the Freedom Caucus. He couldn't work with the Tuesday group. What he has done is start to replace the hard ideological wing of the party with more moderate people. That's why he got rid of Rights Previous. That's why he took out Sean Spicer.
It's hard to tell me you're sending more moderate people when Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon are those who you're putting forth before us. Give me 1 second. Clea, I want to give a final thought on this. Outside of the politics of what's happening, if you have 30, I got 30 seconds for this. Outside of the politics of what's happening, is there an overarching conversation about what this means for culturally how people will receive this bill once they've heard about it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't elaborate on how people feel about this bill. I go back to something that, at the risk of sounding redundant, that I say all the time. I believe that a lot of Trump's and his system's moves are to make this society more present for white people and trying to marginalize everybody else so they can make it great again for whites. And all of these policies and these discussions are just smokescreens for a hidden agenda that's not so hidden. And I think that's really what's going on here.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no. That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.